What's your family's dark secret? Around a month prior to Mark David Chapman's infamous act of shooting John Lennon, my mom went on a date with him. Chapman approached her while she was working in Central Park and asked her out. They watched the movie The Elephant Man and took a carriage ride together. Although my mom thought it was a pleasant date, she didn't feel a strong connection and chose not to contact him again. Surprisingly, she was called in as a character witness when Chapman attempted to plead insanity. The authorities summoned her to the police station, urging her to recall every detail of their date. They wanted her testimony to confirm that he did not exhibit signs of insanity during their encounter. However, Chapman eventually changed his plea, sparing my mom from having to testify in court. This entire experience left my mom somewhat traumatized. As an avid Beatles fan, she spent years blaming herself for John Lennon's death. She would wonder what might have occurred if she had called Chapman back. It took considerable effort on my part to convince her that such thoughts were unfounded and irrational. Story 2. On my 6th birthday, my father sexually assaulted my 15-year-old sister. The trauma of this event haunted my childhood, resulting in nightmares about her being sent away and my father's arrest. My mother and aunt concealed the truth from me until I reached my early 20s. I want to express my feelings towards my sister, who has been significantly affected by this incident. As a young child, I admired my mother, but I mainly recall my eldest sister caring for me. She was my favorite person, reading to me about Tom Thumb, and treating me like her living doll. Following the assault, she vanished, and I was unaware of the reason. Upon reconciling, I shared my memories of her, and we embraced, but she cannot fully comprehend the longing I experienced for her throughout my childhood, and even now. At 46, I am separated from my 55-year-old sister by both distance and time, as we haven't seen each other in 15 years. Although she won't read this, I want to convey my love and appreciation for her. I have always loved her, and my affection remains unwavering. Story 3. When my grandmother was around 17, she conceived my father in a tiny town in northern Louisiana. She alleged that my grandfather was physically abusive, which led her and her sisters to relocate to New Mexico when she was 19, with my father being almost 2 years old. During their journey, she unexpectedly gave birth to my uncle, who looked nothing like my father. She started an affair with her elderly boss while still involved with him. Eventually, she met my step-grandfather, who turned out to be an excellent father figure to my father and uncle. When my grandmother became pregnant with my step-grandfather's child, her daughter resembled her former boss, leading to complications. My grandmother's boss's wife arrived at their home, armed with a gun and a checkbook, attempting to persuade my grandmother to leave. Consequently, my grandmother received a 10-flat-lettered 000 check and bought a new house with my step-grandfather. However, my grandmother continued to have multiple affairs, marrying twice more, and eventually, my step-grandfather committed suicide due to feeling betrayed after raising all 3 children. Before I was born, my biological grandfather appeared on our doorstep with boxes containing letters, birthday cards, and newspaper clippings about my father's achievements. My grandmother had taken the cash and checks and returned the remaining items to my grandfather out of spite. It was later discovered that my grandfather was a kind man who never mistreated my grandmother and missed his son dearly. He worked blue-collar jobs and couldn't afford to visit frequently. My grandmother left him for the local Buick salesman, whose wife confronted her with a gun but no checkbook. Despite her troubled past, my grandmother was kind to me and an exceptional mother-in-law to my mother. She was also wonderful with my brother, who has severe autism. However, she abruptly left and severed ties with my father and his family before passing away, leaving us to learn about her death from my great-aunt. Based on photographs, my grandmother was strikingly beautiful and would have been a successful Instagram influencer if she had been born in the current era. Her ability to attract men likely came naturally to her. Story 4. In the 1970s, my great-aunt, who was recently single, had a second child but decided to give the child up for adoption due to concerns about her ability to provide for both kids. This decision caused significant turmoil within our family, leading to people ceasing communication with each other. Interestingly, my generation was completely unaware of this situation until one day when my mother called me to inform me about our new cousin. I was perplexed and assumed that someone had a child. However, it turned out that the little girl who had been given up for adoption was now in her 40s and had hired a private investigator to locate her biological family. As a result, she has now become a part of our family, and we regularly see her at family gatherings. Story 5. Following a divorce, my mother started a relationship with my father while she was expecting my older sister. Unfortunately, my father sexually abused my oldest sister during this period. After discovering the abuse, my mother confronted him, and he apologized, expressing remorse and seeking forgiveness, which she granted. Regrettably, the abuse persisted. If my mother had reported the incident to the authorities or ended the relationship, I would not have been born. Instead, I was conceived by a child molester with anger issues, who traumatized our family until my mother left him when I was 7 years old. The trauma has significantly impacted my oldest sister, resulting in borderline personality disorder or narcissistic tendencies, preventing her from maintaining healthy relationships with others. She has a contentious relationship with her siblings, and none of us have a close bond with her. 17 years ago, I learned about this family secret, which initially seemed surreal. However, I have come to terms with it and strive to be a decent person, differentiating myself from my father. To clarify, my oldest sister is not my mother. She was only 7 or 8 when I was born. Despite the challenges, I am content and lead a happy life, working in education. I acknowledge the improbability of my existence, yet I choose to be a good person, regardless of my family background. At my wedding, my sisters served as maids of honor, and my brother was our photographer. However, my oldest sister exhibited erratic behavior, demanding that my brother not attend the wedding. She also refused to be in the same location as my father. In response, I asserted my expectations for the wedding and informed her that she could not issue ultimatums. Ultimately, she complied, and my father was disinvited from the ceremony. Although he occasionally complained about it, I firmly stated that he should consider himself fortunate to have any relationship with me at all. My father's actions have caused irreparable harm, and he should not benefit from his wrongdoing. The individual most affected by his actions is now in her 40s. While I hope she seeks help for her issues, I cannot compel her to do so. Nevertheless, I remain supportive and will be there for her if she decides to seek assistance in the future. Story 6. In the early 1920s, my great-grandmother was married to her first husband, who happened to be an Italian mobster in New York. Together, they had 4 children. However, in 1928, 6 years into their marriage, she mysteriously vanished, leaving her family clueless about her whereabouts. Given her husband's known abusive behavior, it was silently assumed that he had orchestrated her demise. But the truth was far from that assumption. In reality, she had eloped with my great-grandfather, and they relocated to Philadelphia, adopting new last names to conceal their past. Throughout their lives, they remained extremely secretive about their history, keeping their original family names and origins hidden. It wasn't until I took a DNA test and connected with a third cousin who happened to be descended from her first set of children that the truth began to unravel. The original 4 children had been placed in orphanages because their first father was unable to care for them. The revelation came as a shock to both families, causing deep emotional wounds for the abandoned children, who are now in their 90s. The impact of their mother's abandonment has affected them throughout their entire lives. Story 7. My grandfather's uncle developed romantic feelings for an underage girl. Unfortunately, he was drafted into the war and had to leave. Upon his return, he received devastating news that she had passed away. Overwhelmed by grief, he made a disturbing decision. He exhumed her grave and kept her deceased body in his bathtub. This shocking incident has been shrouded in silence within our family, and as a result, I have never had the opportunity to meet that side of my relatives. Edit. Firstly, I am astonished by the unexpected attention my comment has received. I went to bed and woke up to an overwhelming number of emails. Secondly, I reached out to my mother to seek answers to the questions raised by many of you. It turns out that the individual involved was actually my grandmother's cousin, who served as a Marine in the Korean War. Upon his return, he was informed of the girl's death. My mother is unsure about her age or cause of death. Consumed by despair, he resorted to the unthinkable act of exhuming her grave and attempting to revive her by keeping her in his bathtub. His actions were discovered just a few days later, as it was a small town where the freshly disturbed grave raised suspicions. This incident remains a taboo topic, known only to my mother. Story 8. My friend's grandfather grew up in South Boston. His father, who used to play ice hockey as a child, once heated the end of his hockey stick and inserted it into his father's vise to create a better curve in the blade. He did this in the cellar of his father's house, which was a subterranean cellar beneath a triplex. The plumbing in the building was located overhead at around 5.5, 6 feet, and his father had covered it with cardboard and duct tape to make it look more finished and prevent things from getting caught on the pipes. One day, as the son was placing the hockey stick into the vise, he heard a thud coming from above the cardboard. He tapped it again and heard the same sound. He climbed a step stool and removed a section of tape and cardboard to reveal a burlap sack containing a .357 Magnum revolver inside a Brinks-labeled bag. Years later, when his father passed away, they held an estate sale and the son was cleaning out a closet. He peered into the closet and saw bundles of aluminum foil high up inside the doorframe. He pulled one down and found a yellowed and oxidized $20 bill inside. He undid the bundle and found nothing but sequentially serial-numbered 20 $20 bills, all bundled in $5,000 increments. The outside of the knot was yellowed, but the rest of the bills were like they had just been printed or withdrawn from an ATM machine. The year was 1950. It was also discovered that his father had gotten a job at a gas station across the street from the Brinks building around a month before the robbery. He was questioned about it after the robbery, and he subsequently quit 2 weeks later and spent the rest of his life selling things at flea markets in the Boston area without holding a real job. The origin and fate of the money remain unknown. Story 9. I wouldn't categorize it as a dark secret, but it is something I discovered as an adult, mainly because my grandmother avoids discussing it. While sorting through my grandmother's belongings following my mother's death, I stumbled upon old photos of a fair-haired baby and a birth certificate for Francesco, my mother's maiden name. Initially, my grandmother hesitated to discuss it, but eventually she disclosed that Francesco, or Frank, was her son, my mother's younger brother by a few years. When Frank was 3, my grandmother's ex-spouse abducted him, and she never saw him again. It is believed that Frank's father, my grandfather, although I don't acknowledge him as such, partly because I never met him, was associated with the mob and may have taken Frank to Sicily. However, no one knows for certain. My grandmother suspects that Frank's father would have taken my mother too if she hadn't been hospitalized due to tonsillitis at the time. This revelation has provided insight into why that side of my family can be secretive. I learned about my mother's previous marriage to someone other than my father as a teenager. Nonetheless, I deeply empathize with my grandmother due to this situation. Story 10. My aunt suffered from a severe illness that made it difficult for her to even get out of her chair or climb stairs, and her son was a drug addict. When she refused to pay off his drug debt yet again, he threatened to burn her alive by pouring gasoline all over the house. The fumes were so strong that she passed out, and in a panic, he took a handful of pills and called an ambulance for himself, neglecting to mention his mother's situation. The police arrived with the paramedics, arrested him, and took my aunt to the hospital for treatment. I immediately disowned him after hearing about his actions. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel not to miss new cool videos. See you soon.